Has to feel like Christmas morning in the Dan Hurley household. It's the first day of practice. Wake up, everyone. You're locked on UConn.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the UConn Huskies. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before we dive into today's show, as always, I want to take a moment to thank you for subscribing and also ask you for a small favor. If you aren't subscribing and you're enjoying the content, please take a second to subscribe and follow the audio versions as well, wherever you listen to your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio. It really helps the show grow, and I truly appreciate that support. Every follow, subscription, download, it helps create more revenue for UConn NIL because Locked On UConn is donating 10% of all revenue to Bleeding Blue for Good. So by supporting this show, you are directly supporting the UConn athletic program through the NIL effort. So thank you for being a part of this community. Well, today is the first official day. We kick off today's show. It's the road to a possible three-peat for UConn men's basketball officially began today, Friday. Did a Football Friday show. Hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't watched it yet, go check it out because the football team is playing Buffalo tomorrow on my birthday. But I couldn't not do a basketball show today knowing that this is what the tenet of this show has been all about. I would say 90% of my audience, maybe 80% are UConn fans altogether, but 90% of them prefer the basketball to the football. Not to say that we don't support the football team, but basketball is more of our passion. It always has been for me. So gotta be locked on today to talk about what is going on with the road ahead and kind of do a little bit of a preview and really talk about some of the positional battles that we really haven't talked about in a while because we've been focused on recruiting and other aspects of the UConn program. So Dan Hurley, his entire group gets them for 20 hours per week to mold into contenders once again. And the Huskies enter this season with a lot more expectations than even last year, following back-to-back national championships. This stretch of 6 weeks is where the foundation of this season will be set. And what makes this period especially fascinating for me is the amount of talent and positional competition that UConn has. And Coach Hurley himself has admitted earlier in the offseason that this might be his most talented roster. I think he's walked back those comments a little bit recently in the media, but emphasizing more that the talent is more abundant, that there's more. I think he was quoted as saying more viable players. So the rotations may be a little bit different this year. So this season, unlike last, no one's position really is guaranteed. In an interview video series in depth with Graham Benzinger, if you haven't seen it, please check it out. It's fantastic. Really was amazing to see his point, which is when asked about going to the pros and what that looked like, he said, you can't make Anthony Davis do stairs when, the advantage that he has when it comes to coaching and how he sets up his practices and the culture around it is what really gives UConn the competitive advantage against other teams. And so he starts off, if you watch, there's a 10-minute segment where they get all access, very rare behind the scenes stuff. And one of them is he's writing on the chalkboard or the chalkboard, see how old I am, on the whiteboard. He said, getting an apology text from Zay for having a bad practice. And he kind of pauses and turns to Kamani and others and saw, he said probably one of the nicest things. And he stops and he's asked if we've ever gotten one. And Kamani's like, no, but then he's like, we have to have. And he mentions a Rhode Island player that I guess, did that back in the day, but he said it's the first one he's gotten here. So they cut to a practice scene, and already you see that the summer is, that it's just intense. Like you can just feel it. It's palpable. And they interview Alex Karaban, and he says, coach is way more intense than last year. Just how he's, he's yelling a lot more, and he's getting himself into season shape, right? And then they cut to Coach Hurley saying, Liam just got stripped and just like, kind of walked to the end of the line. He's not won a game here. And he brings in a bunch of people. He's like, come over here, especially for the guys that, he said, all right, let's huddle, and he's trying to get them to kind of pay attention to him and lock in and say real quick, especially for the guys that haven't won a game here. For us having not done a thing, especially for you guys have not done a thing for UConn basketball, you should be running everywhere. And I should be wearing my Andre Jackson ran everywhere. But this is his superpower. Nobody is treated differently because you got an NIL, just because you got an NIL bag or because you're his son. I think the next clip is Andrew Hurley saying that, you always got to be on your toes because it could be you that gets yelled at. I mean, this guy is the epitome of a meritocracy. And really with that kind of like insane dictatorship mindset of this is the way we do it at UConn. And we have the results to prove it. So get locked in or get out, essentially, right? Those aren't his words. Those are my words. The Huskies won't open their season until November 6th against my alma mater, Sacred Heart. But what happens in practice during the next 42 days will dictate the team's rotation and ultimately how ready they are to compete for another title. I think we'll be watching every positional battle extremely closely. But today we're going to dive into 3 key areas of focus: the wings, the 2-guard matchup, and perhaps the most open competition, who will run the point guard spot. Although I say that, but, and I wrote this last night, but, when I say that, I mean it because I feel like we're going to see a lot of, and we'll get into it when we get into the segment, I feel like we're going to see a lot of Ahmad Nowell and Hassan Diarra playing together. But that's a story a little bit later in the show. Let's go pay some bills, and we are going to talk about front court depth in the big man battle coming up after this. Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to get your daily fantasy sports fix. Here's how it works. You pick 2 to 6 players, and if they go over or under their projected stats, you can win up to 25 times your money. It's that simple. No competing against other people, no complicated salary caps, just you against the numbers. I've been using Prize Picks myself, and it makes watching games even more exciting. This week, I've got Darrell Robinson repeating his stellar performance against FAU as the UConn faces Buffalo tomorrow, and I'm banking on Joe Burrow helping the Bengals snap out of their funk. What's great about Prize Picks is that it lets you combine these picks across different sports. So college football, NFL, combine them. Doesn't matter. It takes less than 60 seconds to make your picks, and you could choose from a variety of sports, whether it's college football, NFL, anything in between. Download those Prize Picks today and use code LOCKEDONCollege and get $50 instantly when you play $5. Code LOCKEDONCollege to receive your $50 bonus guaranteed when you play $5. Prize Picks. Run your game. All right, guys, you're back on Locked On UConn. As promised, we're going to go over the front court depth in the big man battle. Let's start with the most hotly contested position on the court. I think Samson Johnson, as a senior with 2 national championships under his belt, has been an absolute fire starter for this team. Hasn't really had the need, I shouldn't say ability, but he hasn't really been asked to be a starter yet. This year, he is. I mean, let's face it. They did bring in Terrace Reed. They do have Youssef Sangare. But for all intents and purposes, he backed up Donovan Clingan the same way Donovan backed up Adam Sanogo. And UConn has that pecking order. Now, if in the next 42 days, Terrace Reed dominates and shows Dan Hurley that he should be the starter, I could see them making that switch. But for now, it seems like Johnson's time to step into the starting lineup. He has the athleticism, energy, and championship experience that make him a strong contender. And there's also, as we mentioned, aforementioned, Terrace Reed Jr., the transfer from Michigan. The thing about Terrace Reed that brings a lot of, I don't want to say attention, but the thought process is that he has a different style game than Samson. And the thing that makes the two of them kind of, I feel like, the ideal tandem is that they have similar size capabilities, both at 6'10", but Terrace is more of a wide body. He's a physical specimen. He's about 6'10", 260 pounds. And, what's Samson? I think he beefed up a little bit, got 15 extra pounds of muscle. So he's probably about 230. So Reed has the kind of footwork and post skills that really kind of makes the coaches salivate. I mean, let's be honest. I think Dan Hurley was quoted as saying, Terrace is almost too good for his own good. Like he's too athletic for his own good. Meaning he can probably do anything, so he hasn't really focused on one thing. And I think that's where, again, the coaching comes in. So the competition between these two is going to be intense while both players bring really valuable skills to the table. I think it's clear that only one will get the starting nod. I don't think they're going to play a lot together, if at all. So I think for me, what I'm hopefully I'm going to see is really one of these guys moves forward and steps into the spotlight. I think that's going to be Samson. Not for anything other than the fact that, you know, he obviously has been there before, but he also is just kind of a staple for UConn. And what I mean by that is, like, he's been on this team for a while now. 2 national championships, has been through the wars with this team. Guys respect him. I think he's got more in his bag than he's really showed. And I think they're going to allow him to kind of step up in that regard. I don't, really run a lot of plays for guys like Donovan, and whatnot. But I think as far as scoring, I think he has a scoring uptick. As far as rebounding, everyone's worried about rebounding. I think rebounding is a total team exercise for this UConn men's basketball team. I don't think you're going to see the type of rebounding numbers that are typical for centers and power forwards. I think for the most part, they spread it around. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's great that we have wings who are 6'7", 6'8", who can come down and also get some rebounds. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. As far as, making sure big guys stay off the offensive glass, I think that's more of their job, is to kind of clear those guys out. But I feel like Coach Hurley said that, they won't share the floor at all. So whoever wins this battle will play a key role in setting the tone for the Huskies' interior presence this season. I think both of these guys are underrated shot blockers. I think Samson's had some of the most amazing blocks we've ever seen as far as athleticism. He runs the floor great, which is obviously a big plus for Dan Hurley and his staff. And then there's Youssef Sangare. They showed some clips of him the other day, and I have to say, man, he just looked better. Like, I know I can be edited, and people probably call me crazy on that, but I think he takes another step forward this year in the development. So I think it does come down to Samson and Terrace for the starting nod and kind of battling for minutes. But don't be surprised if they use Youssef to kind of create this three-headed monster. I've said this earlier in the year. I don't think that Dan really likes to play 10, 11, 12 guys in his rotation, but you may have to this year. I think if you want to make sure that these guys know that you're invested in them the same way they invested in you. Youssef didn't transfer. He was a part of that now sophomore class that had Steph Castle go pro last year, but the rest of them stayed. So I think you're going to probably see Dan Hurley show some loyalty there, as long as he's getting this return on investment. And I can't see him not, right? Unless Terrace and Samson are just so much better than Youssef, like leaps and bounds. And I don't know if we can say that for a fact. I know I can't. So I think that's the front court battle. The depth is there. 3 deep. All these guys are big. Really look forward to seeing how it plays out. My gut says that Samson's going to start, although at the beginning of the transfer portal season, I said I wouldn't be opposed to Terrace starting, so that Samson continues that off the bench role and not mess with kind of the rotational stuff that Dan Hurley likes to do. But considering the depth of this entire team, I don't think he's afraid of elevating guys to that now starting role and putting more on their plate. So when we return, we're going to talk about the wings, and not the buffalo wings that hopefully I'll eat later on my birthday tomorrow, but essentially all the wing battles, 2-guard and the point guard battles. I think those are going to be really interesting, and I think there's some really interesting combos that are going to be coming out of those. We're going to talk about that coming up after this. It's our old friends here at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Look, guys, if you're NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, so much more, or the same page where you place your bets. So you'll get started if you're a new bettor. $5 bet gets you $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Right now, I'm looking at, with the UConn game tomorrow, -6 at home is looking juicy, but Buffalo is pretty solid on defense, so you might want to see if that line drops a little bit. People start putting some money on Buffalo, that could drop a little bit. Or you could look at alternative lines and just kind of lay a little more money. Could go to, instead of -110 to -140 or -160 if you want to get it to 5, or I think at the beginning it was at 4.5. All that said, the over-under is 44.5, so I'll lay the points and take the under with -6 and under 44.5 for UConn. Visit FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Okay, we're back on Locked On UConn. Excuse me. All right, we're back for the power of podcasting. Wings, 2-guard matchup, and the point. Those are what's left. And I saved that for last because to me, I think what's going to be so interesting with this is UConn is absolutely loaded with talent. First name we need to mention is, of course, Alex Karaban, who was probably the only, I would say the only, I think one of the locks to be in the starting position at the 4 spot. But the competition on the wings is wide open, and this will impact who plays alongside him. So we have freshman sensation Liam McNeely, who could be one of the most exciting players in the country. He's projected to primarily play at the 3, but he could also slide to the 2. I think he'll play a little bit of that. I've talked about that earlier in the year. I think McNeely has the potential to be a one-and-done player and go to the NBA, although it'll all depend on where his stock is at the end of the season. But he brings that immense versatility as a shooter, as a defensive player, offensive firepower all over the place. He's the kind of talent that can really stretch defenses with his deep shooting, a la Alex Karaban. People call him the Alex Karaban clone. But he also can defend multiple positions. Positional versatility, that word we use over and over again. It's unlike McNeely will plays much at the 4 spot to start the season. But who knows? As big games start to roll around, that could change based off of matchups, size, capabilities, and also his capability and ability to do so. I think some of the other players to watch, obviously, is Jaylin Stewart, who was highly impressive last season, especially as a freshman. I think Stewart has, again, the positional versatility to back up Alex Karaban at the 4, but also is capable of playing the 2 or the 3. Again, all things that Dan Hurley loves, guys that can play 2 and 3 different positions. He is an absolute defensive specialist and presence. He will be important, particularly in battles against Big East opponents. But other players I feel like are going to be similar to that are players like Jaden Ross and Isaiah Abraham. He's going to be challenged for minutes. I don't think these guys are going to lay down for him just because Jay Stu had a great game against Marquette in the Big East championship game. That was last year. This is this year. So I think Ross is going to be more of a traditional wing, but I think Abraham is likely to see fewer minutes, but could provide depth at both the 3 and the 4, especially if guys get in foul trouble. And I think they're really going to try to put Zay in positions where he's going to be successful early to build up that confidence, because I think they feel like he is an absolute hidden gem. And I know he was a top 60 player, but let's face it, guys, being a top 60 player doesn't get you those, top 10. I was, 5-star pub that, a lot of people love. Abraham was a 4-star. A lot of that was under the radar. He has proven that he is absolutely not someone that you should, feel like you can't put on the floor, because he's competed really well in these open scrimmages. From what I've heard, he's dominated at times from an athletic standpoint, just needs to get better as a shooter. But I think from a defensive standpoint, to get out and play and be a versatile guy that can get out and run and get some easy buckets, I think that's where you're going to see Zay get some minutes and maybe play early in the season. As we have another key position, obviously we bring back Solo Ball, who is a player that is strictly been a shooting guard. I think he could probably play some off ball or on the point, but he is impressed with last season. He had some particular early returns in his freshman year against North Carolina, having 14 points in the Garden. I think it's going to be interesting. He's going up against Aiden Mahaney for minutes. The junior transfer from St. Mary's, who you guys all know I've been very high on, who averaged nearly 14 points a game over the last 2 seasons at St. Mary's. 1,000-point scorer in 2 seasons. That doesn't happen by accident. I think both of these guys give Coach Hurley some flexibility to run 2 point guards on the floor at the same time. And this ability can be, they can interchange positions between the two, and one will be crucial, especially given the depth and versatility on UConn's roster. So I can't see them. I can see them playing together. I think that, but I also think it'd be more Aiden on the ball and Solo off it. Because let's face it, guys like Hassan and Ahmad, who we're going to talk about here shortly, are also going to be in the mix for a lot of minutes in this roster. But it just wouldn't surprise me. It would surprise me if one of these 2 guys doesn't play a lot of minutes because of other players stepping up. Doesn't mean that I wouldn't like it. I mean, I'm all about who Dan Hurley thinks gives us the best chance to win. So I'm never going to be like, oh man, I thought Aiden was going to be great, so Solo shouldn't play, or vice versa. Like it doesn't matter to me. Like I truly think that the problems that Dan Hurley is going to have is going to just be about getting these kids locked into do whatever you need to win the game. And if that means you only scored 6 points, but you were fantastic on defense. And that's something that he's created. And I think he really hasn't had a roster like this that has a lot of quote unquote question marks that maybe some folks are going to be worried about that type of stuff yet. I don't know if he's dealt with that with this group yet, and I hope he hasn't. And I don't see why it starts, but those are the things that, a guy like me who isn't in the room thinks about. So I think the battle for that 2-guard spot will be fascinating. And I think Mahaney's experience and flexibility might give him a slight edge, but then you have Solo, who is an immensely better athlete, can be a plus shooter. I expect to see both players get significant minutes. I think UConn has that kind of depth that allows for plenty of that in the rotation in the backcourt. So then we go into the point guard situation. As we mentioned, I think Aiden can play a little bit of a point guard, but who's going to really replace Steph Castle, who wasn't really truly the only point guard yet, Tristen Newton, who's now in the NBA. So obviously the leading candidate is Hassan Diarra. He's a senior grad student who was a complete spark plug, and very, very similar to Hassan in the Terrace situation, where ultimately he was a guy who came off the bench and gave them great minutes. Also a very capable three-point shooter who's made that a part of his game. Great finisher at the rim, incredible passer. He's the Big East Sixth Man of the Year. So he brings that energy, that defensive mindset, that bulldog mentality, and can't teach leadership. Hassan is that. He's leadership personified, and it seems like he's really paid his dues and earned the chance to start. I don't like that mentality though. Like, paying your dues means you're a part of this team and everyone plays a role. I think Hassan has earned the loyalty of the staff by not transferring, by being a bench player that comes off and plays good minutes and really kind of helps lead them in certain situations. Like we mentioned, I think Aiden has an ability to see some minutes at the point guard spot, really kind of running the show. But there's also, I feel like the wild card of all this is Ahmad Nowell. I think he is absolutely the purest of point guards in the respect that he is a guy he has played off the ball. So, but he is, to me, of all those three, when you talk about Aiden, when you talk about Hassan, you talk about Ahmad, I love Ahmad's game. He is kind of like a baby Kemba in the respect that I think Kemba wasn't as good of a shooter coming in as Ahmad is, because Ahmad can actually play a little off the ball if you need him to and be a complete spot up shooter because he's got that type of range. But he's got the talent that is going to push people for minutes, and he's got the mentality that is not going to be easy to deal with in the respect of he wants the rock and he wants to play. And I think he's going to be a key playmaker. And I honestly think that down the line, he may end up getting the starting nod in terms of the ability to kind of lead this team. But I think initially it's going to go to Haas with a little mixture of Aiden. But I also think this is something that I brought up a little bit earlier in the show. I think Hassan and Ahmad may actually end up playing a lot together, where they have multiple point guards. Because again, like I mentioned, even though they're not the tallest of guards, we're used to these 6'5", 6'4" guards. At 6 foot, 6'1", 6'2" with Hassan, you can kind of spread them out a little bit and spread teams out a little bit, because both I think Ahmad Nowell is going to prove that he is not a guy you can leave alone on the 3-point line. So now, the way UConn runs offense, having 4 shooters at all times is going to be something that I would imagine they do constantly. So whether that's Hassan, Aiden, Alex, Jaylin, and pick your center, Terrace or Samson, or something crazy like you throw Hassan at the point or Ahmad at the point, Liam at the 2, Jaylin at the 3, Alex at the 4, and Samson at the 5. So all of a sudden you have 4 shooters. Or we've talked about this before. I would love to see them at some point just to kind of run people out of the gym that should have no business hanging with them. Alex at the 5, Liam or Jaylin at the 4. They interchange those 3 players. Then you put either Solo or Aiden at the 2 and Ahmad Nowell at the 1 and just run them. And just good luck. Good luck trying to stop everybody on the floor being able to space the floor and shoot with elite shooting ability. And I think the positional versatility that Dan Hurley loves and that he has with this team is why he is saying that's the most talented. Not because every player is a 5-star, because all these kids are, going to go to the NBA. Maybe they all end up in professional rankings someday. But I think that's where he's kind of walked it back so that people understand, like, I just feel like we have more options than we've had in the past. And I think that's true to form. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. It's a little bonus content, on a Football Friday. So I really appreciate you. Remember, make sure you like the podcast, all the likes, all of the subscriptions, all of the downloads on Apple and Spotify, all add revenue to the show, and all is going to a nice portion of that is going to the NIL collective. So really appreciate you guys and appreciate the people who really tune into the program, especially my everydayers. So have a wonderful Friday. Go UConn football this weekend, beat Buffalo, and we're another day closer to UConn basketball. I'm your host, Mark Zanetto, asking you to stay locked in, stay connected, make sure that toughness meter is always rising. And as always, go Huskies.